The government says there is. I believe them. And I've continued to speak about, as I did today, about economic issues and policy errors by our government and other governments, whether it's the US government, the mainland government, Hong Kong government. And those affect the financial markets, of course, those issues. Although there are some things that one has to be more careful about, and we still don't know what red lines really are. They're more pink lines. They're smudged. I've still felt able since then, since 2020, to speak on air and to write about the policy issues. And I think as long as you're not, doing it without foundation, it's hard to say that you are inciting disaffection of the government, which is the sort of sedition definition. But it's always in the back of my mind since then, some things you cannot do. And then there are some simple things that you can't do, like in America it's okay to take the knee when the national anthem is played. In Hong Kong you'll be arrested and jailed for up to 3 years. That's rather a shame. I think that way you don't know who actually respects the anthem and the flag and so on. It wasn't necessary to do that, but so I would question the need for those laws, but they are what they are.
Any task or project that's still in your bucket list that you need to have accomplished if you have the list? And a quick follow-up actually on the question I raised before. Do you still have the confidence that somehow, somewhat later, Hong Kong will still try again?
Yes. Well, the bucket list mostly involves spending as much time as I can with my dear wife and our children. She's been very supportive throughout my illness, and well before that. We've been together since the 1990s. And our sons are now at university in the UK. One of them is about to graduate and move on to his PhD. And we'd still like to travel if we can, subject to my health. So bucket list becomes, when you only have a few short time left, and it has been the case for 5 years now, your priorities immediately change. When I was 54, before diagnosis, I thought I could be active in public life for another 30 years, active in investment for 30 years, and be a much bigger philanthropist because of the accumulated returns after another 30 years. And towards my 80s, I would be focusing on, giving it away, playing with my grandchildren, and so on. So all of that changed. And to your second question, why do I think we will be in a better place eventually? Well, there's no a large economy on earth that has achieved high levels of prosperity. And I don't mean the current level in the mainland, which is only about a quarter of the OECD average. I mean OECD average. You don't get there when you're still trying to plan everything, when you're restricting a lot of freedoms, such as the movement of capital in and out of the country, the movement of people within the country under the Hook Out Permit Scheme, for example, what you can see and read on the internet, and other things like that. You don't keep going up that economic curve without giving people those freedoms. And so sooner or later, the mainland and then Hong Kong, of course, will have to adopt reforms and accountability. That's my view. It's not a call for subversion or anything, I should say, under the NSL. I'm not calling for the overthrow of anybody. I'm just saying that that's likely to happen because socialism and central planning were tried and tested from 1949 to 1979 and failed in China. The USSR failed, Cuba failed, North Korea failed. Economically, central planning doesn't work. Deng Xiaoping recognized that failure and started the reform process. And under a different mainland leadership, that might have continued, but it hasn't. But leaderships change over time. Nobody lives forever. I know that, and you know that, and so there will be a better time, I believe, even if there are ups and downs along the way. And I hope for a peaceful transition to a more open society, because that would be for the benefit of everybody in the country. Similarly, in Russia, they won't have the same president forever. In both places, there would be a power vacuum if the president suddenly disappeared, and that is because authoritarian leaders tend to surround themselves with much weaker people. But eventually there will be a transition, and hopefully the world will be a happier and more peaceful place, and we'll have fewer frictions between free market economies, and question whether the US is now still a free market economy with all these tariffs, but there'll be less friction between the what you might call the democratic world and the non-democratic world. So, you know, because that's how you generate prosperity, by moving towards open systems. It happened with the fall of the Iron Curtain. Why did the Iron Curtain fall? And East Germany joined West Germany, and so on. That was just because of a huge economic disparity between one side of the Iron Curtain and the other, and it had to change.
David, Cangang Wong with Bloomberg News. Any parting word for the Hong Kong financial regulators when we see more and more signs of direct intervention from Beijing and more greater demand to adhere to the market development side of their work instead of investor protection? Any parting word for the financial regulators?
Well, as I've said many times, we need to make Hong Kong stronger in terms of investor protection, to raise the price that investors are willing to pay in our markets, and that will attract companies that are willing to sign up to those standards, and reinvigorate our financial markets at a time of disengagement, because there's pressure on Chinese companies listed in the USA to move back from both sides of the Pacific, so we need to provide a more trustworthy framework, in proper independent directors elected by independent shareholders, quarterly financial reporting, a class action system for investor remedies when directors abuse their companies, and things that would make investors willing to pay more for stocks. And also one share, one vote, instead of these treating tech companies as if they're somehow special and need to have the founders with excessive voting rights relative to their equity. This is something that America was moving away from. The institutional investors were very unhappy about companies like Snap in the US that had almost no voting rights for public shares. It's particularly a toxic combination if you have capital with no voting rights and citizens with no voting rights in a country, because then, also in the mainland, it's very difficult for them to move capital out, despite the so-called Stock Connect scheme, and so having greater accountability to investors will improve valuations.
Thank you for the Asia. So Hong Kong economy, especially the traditional sector, has been suffering in the past few years. So then how do you feel about the current direction of this reforming of the government that is moving towards? And also, in your mind, what is the most important issue of Hong Kong economy that you wish to address?
Well, the Hong Kong economy in itself is quite a small one, apart from the trade that it does. But there's plenty that we can be doing. First of all, cut expenditure on wasteful, centrally planned infrastructure projects, whether it's expanding the cyberport, which was obviously a white elephant. Why do you want a bigger white elephant? Committing land to favoured industries instead of allowing land to be sold for the highest bid, and relaxing land leases. So you don't tell people you have to build a hotel here. on this piece of land or a data center on this piece of land, you say, how much is this land worth with a plot ratio of 15 or whatever? And you can build what you want on it, and you can change your mind later and change the use without going back to amend your land lease. So we can reform the land system to make it more market oriented. We can abolish stamp duty. We can abolish the gimmicks in the profits tax regime. We can return to a flat rate of tax for properties on rates rather than trying to escalate it for larger properties, residential that is, and just simplify things and reduce the size of the Inland Revenue Department, which has to deal with all these things. And we did make some progress over the years. Since the handover, the government abolished estate duty because only a small number of people were hit by it. The rich could avoid it with offshore trusts anyway. We abolished duty on wine, which stimulated the wine industry here. And we've even started to change the spirits tax, but we could just abolish that too. If you're going to allow people to buy alcohol in wine and beer, then what does it matter about spirits? So abolition of taxes and simplification of laws. There are laws that don't work. For example, the idling engine law, the total fines collected in last year were about $20,000 or less. Total. We spent all this money putting the law in place, and it was done as a distraction to roadside air pollution problems, which have now been addressed, or are being addressed, with electrification of our fleet. But why raise taxes on electric vehicles when you're trying to encourage people to go electric? Indeed, why tax the new registrations at all? Instead, you need to do congestion pricing on roads. So people who use the roads pay for it at peak times particularly, but you don't need to tax the ownership of the vehicle itself. Because if you just want to buy a luxury sports car and look at it in your garage and not put many miles on the clock, you're not really hurting anybody. It's your choice, right? We don't put a tax on diamonds or paintings. Why do we have a tax on luxury cars? Why is it escalating? So there are lots of things we can do to simplify things and make it a more attractive place to live. Without making the deficit any worse, mainly because we should cut spending and never again do the handout thing. Handouts are totally unnecessary. Welfare is very necessary. We can do more welfare for people who are unfortunate, either born disabled, stricken with heavy illnesses or whatever, or out of work and without savings. There are lots of things we can do to improve the safety net without removing the work incentive. Other countries have gone way too far with that. The UK is an example, and even Labour is now recognising that the welfare system is so generous that a lot of people can't be bothered to work, and they need to reform that. And we mustn't go down that road ourselves, and we mustn't be handing out vouchers just to buy political support from the public, who in any case don't elect the government. Why are you doing it?
Rachel from The Wire China, you mentioned a number of economic and financial issues with Hong Kong just now. What do you see as the crux of these problems? Is it the lack of political will?
Sorry, say it again.
What is the crux of these problems?
Which problems?
The wide range of problems you mentioned in the talk just now. Do you think it's a lack of political will, that there's no solutions for this, or that the government is not pushing for solutions to these?
Well, there is a skills deficit. We're supposed to be importing talent to Hong Kong, but I wish we could import more talent into the government. I wish we had a better financial secretary who was more familiar with economics and free markets. We haven't had a really good one since Anthony Leung, basically. It's been all downhill from there. We had a textiles tycoon, hereditary one, Henry Tang. Very nice guy, but didn't know much about economics either. But attracting talent into the government is difficult when they may face sanctions against their personal affairs from foreign powers. Of course, I'm not advocating that, but it happens. And it's a deterrent to taking on a public service role when you could just stay private and run your business. Anthony Leung didn't need to take the job, but in that under Tung Chee-hwa, things were still very open, and there was no real, it was a public service role that he undertook, and earning substantially less than he could have done in the private sector. So that's a problem that needs to be addressed, and we need to back off the whole post-NSL paranoia, I would say. We all understand the importance to every country of not being attacked by terrorists and having a peaceful environment and so on. We don't need to be lectured on that all the time with great giant posters on National Security Education Day, which seems to go on for a whole month. It's not just a day, the posters are still up. And it's hard to attract people into Hong Kong with the promotions that we are doing when at the same time we are putting out bounties on people who are really no problem to Hong Kong anymore. They've left, right? They're in exile, they have no power except their own voice, and we shouldn't be afraid of free speech. But if you keep saying we will hunt you to the ends of the earth, and you actually start employing private security people in the UK to track dissidents and so on, through the Trade Office, allegedly, then it sends a contradictory message to Hong Kong is here, open for business, which I believe it is. Quite a good place to do business. It could be better, but we do have a low tax regime still. It is easy to start a business here. And we should be promoting those things and toning down the rhetoric on the other things. It's not a good look if you arrive in your hotel room and turn on the English language TV and have to hear the anthem followed by a message on how to respect the flag and and so on. And the anthem itself. I mean, do you have to learn the words before you come? We don't need to carry out those campaigns internally because we all understand the new regime, the new era, and how to live within it and still enjoy Hong Kong for all of the wonderful things it has in terms of the tourism attractions, the country parks, the cuisine, the travel connectivity, and so on. Now that the airports are open again.
David, showing off the Spanish news agency.
Sorry, say again.
Spanish news agency. You're very unique in your activism and your insights. I think a lot of website readers, their concern is that after you're gone, hopefully not anytime soon, there won't be anybody who has the same caliber to do what we do. What do you say to that? Do you think it's concerning? And do you observe any individual or institution who could continue your legacy, so to speak?
Well, thank you. I'm not unique, really. I'm sure that in the right environment, there will be others who can take forward what I've done. There are still some NGOs that promote free markets. You heard from one of them in a question at the lunch. I hope that over time Hong Kong will return and China will become more open to public debate on issues that benefit society and the economy. I was not in a unique position, but in an unusual position in my early 30s of being financially secure and being willing to say things that might make me very unemployable because I didn't think I would need employment again. Most people can't do that. Lots of people over the years have said to me, well done, well said, David, you're on your own. Because in their position, in their jobs, they needed to prioritise that, and a lawyer in a law firm that wants work for the companies can't publicly say what they agree with when I say it. But I've left all of my data set open in the hope that there will be some groups that don't just commercialize it, but keep it open to the public as well, and build on that. I'm sure that over time the policy debates will continue, and hopefully in a more open environment.
When you talk about Hong Kong Council, what is the biggest risk that Hong Kong economy is facing now?
Biggest issue?
Yeah, biggest risk.
Well, it's hard to prioritize. Obviously, we're affected by the ongoing trade talks because shipments. Hong Kong is regarded by the US as part of China for customs purposes. That separate recognition was withdrawn by the US after the MSL took effect. And so all of our exports, which are mostly re-exports from China anyway, are tariffed. So that's going to affect the level of trade, but hopefully in the very near future there will be a climb down. If you look at what Trump is doing, he's blinking, he's stepping things down and claiming victories. He hasn't gone all the way. There's still a 10% tax on imports from the UK after this supposed trade deal, except for a small quota of cars and a few other exemptions, but aero engines or steel and aluminium, and they haven't actually signed anything. It's non-binding. But that's going to have some impact on the economy here, and we're going through a process of economic change. We always have over time. Hong Kong was once a plastics and transistor radios factory, amongst other things. Li Ka-shing came down here to work for his father-in-law, making plastic flowers, and married his cousin, and so on. And so there's a history of change. Change is always happening and should, because that's how markets reform themselves. And we used to be a much bigger attraction for mainlanders for shopping. And they are now a much bigger attraction for Hong Kongers for shopping. And, the government wanted integration. I'm not sure if this is what they planned, but now it's very easy to get across the border, even easy for people with permanent residency to get a card, electronic card for non-Chinese permanent residents to go to and fro. And my family's been doing that. I haven't dared. I'm not sure if I'm allowed, but I'm not going to jeopardize my remaining few months by doing that. So the retail sector has to reform, and there are probably still attractions to coming here and buying gold, for example, gold jewellery, particularly if you can wear it home and say, I came out with it and it's not subject to inward VAT. Buy a nice watch and say, yes, that's the watch I left with. Actually, I left with a fake and came back with a real one. So you can look at the cameras and still a watch. But there are some things where we still have a trust advantage, I think, and the mainlanders trust the products here a bit more than they do in the mainland. You'd have to ask them. So there are headwinds, and then the disengagement financially, which could go further. If things don't cool down, then the US could order asset managers to dump Hong Kong Chinese stocks. They've already done that to some extent. There's a list of stocks that the US asset managers can't own that were established during the first Trump administration, and that could make things worse if they carry on that way. And I should disclose conflict of interest. I own 10% of the Economic Times.
Well, Ezra from the Kyoto News. Now that you've talked about the trade talks, so how do you think Hong Kong can survive the situation? Do you see if there's any edge during the conflict? How do you think the city can see itself?
Well, look, one thing is that if these tariffs stay in place, or especially the high ones that have been suspended for another 70 days remaining or something, then Hong Kong becomes quite an attractive shopping destination for US people. You jump on a plane from from Seattle or Los Angeles. If you don't want to go to Vancouver, if you're not if you're near the Canadian border, you just go over there and pay a small amount of sales tax. But you come here, there's no VAT. We are a free port, and thank goodness that's in the basic law, because I can be fairly confident, based on the way we've been following mainland policy, that if we did not have the free port in the basic law, then our government would have imposed the same retaliatory tariffs that the mainland has imposed. After all, we did everything they wanted during COVID, including staying closed for much longer than necessary. After Hong Kong had a huge pandemic in January of 2021, 2022, we kept our borders closed. It was no way we were going back to COVID zero, like the mainland was trying to maintain. But unlike Singapore, we did not reopen. We even encouraged old people to think that we weren't going to reopen, therefore they didn't get vaccinated. The elderly were the ones that were most affected by COVID. And when that happened, they were badly hit. And we still stayed closed. And I think we would have copied the mainland tariff policy if we were not a free port in the basic law. But we are, and we should make that a promotion campaign. All you need to do, if you're the tourism board in America, Hong Kong Tourism Office, or Trade Office, is to say, Hong Kong duty free, yay, right? That's the only message right now that is needed to attract people to come here, have a good holiday, enjoy our restaurants and our attractions, and shop while they're here, and then claim that the iPhone they are carrying is the one they left with, and so on. They'll get back through the border and not pay the tariff when they arrive back in the USA.
We know you have been devoting yourself for the benefits of minority shareholders and even retail investors. Do you have any strategy for investors, especially retail investors, to face with such a turbulent business environment? Do you think the future is still promoting it?
Well, look, I've always been an advocate of transparency and disclosure. We need more of that, as well as the right to elect the independent directors who sit in the minority seats on the board. I always encourage investors to do their own homework. Don't expect the market to tell you what the stock is worth. The market only tells you what buyers and sellers are today trading the stock at, a price for a minority shareholding in a company that usually has a controlling shareholder. And that price may be manipulated to some extent or to a large extent. And if it is, then it might be far away from fair value, below or above even. It doesn't have to be just above, it could be manipulated downwards for reasons to benefit certain people. So do your own homework. And the regulators should not waste time trying to prosecute so-called market manipulation when they should be looking at the internal bad governance of companies, the fraud, the hidden loans to connected parties, the ways in which they steal money from companies, basically. That's much more important. But the idea that somehow the regulators should encourage people not to do their homework and just to trust the market price, that is the wrong message to send. And that's what the market manipulation offences prosecutions tend to say is, investors were misled by the market. Well, you can't be misled if you do your homework. If your stock goes up in a bubble and you know that it's worth much less, sell it. If it's pushed down for some reason and you know it's worth much more, buy it. Do your homework. That's what leads to investment success. Not just homework on the financial statements, but also on the people who run the company, the governance history of the company. I never buy IPOs, or almost never. I think I did buy the MTR. But that was a government listing. The reason is that if it's going to collapse in a pile of fraud, if it was faking it to make it in the accounts, you will find out in the first few years they can't hide those things indefinitely, and so after 3 to 5 years, it's safer to look at the company, and by then often the market has got bored with it. It's not sexy, and they've moved on, and then I tend to invest. Okay, we should probably wind up. One last question, and then.
Hi, I'm from Reuters. How do you see the current CK Hutchison portfolio controversy? And also, how do you see the current trade war impact on the Hong Kong shipment industry? Can Hong Kong still maintain its status as a shipment union?
Well, on the container terminals, I think the people who run those, and there's only 2 big firms there, have always expected that one day those will become real estate developments, because the opportunity cost of that land is so great, and so our ports will probably decline in volume, but there are tax advantages still at the moment to adding a little bit of value, relabeling shipping through Hong Kong, because our tax rate is still lower than the mainland. If we keep spending the way we are, we'll have to raise tax rates, and then our tax advantage becomes less attractive, and some of those profits will just vanish because they'll be booked in the mainland instead. Sorry, what was the first part of the question?
Also, how do you see the current CK Hutchison portfolio?
Yeah, the ports deal. Look, it's the company always claims that they're not controlled by the mainland government. It's a Hong Kong tycoon-controlled company. I tend to believe that. Donald Trump did not believe that and said, no, it's controlled by the mainland government and they are controlling the Panama Canal rather than just 2 of the ports of the canal. If Beijing had said, actually, Li Ka-shing is right, we don't control this, and it's a free market deal, we're free to sell it, that's fine. Instead, they took the other view and made a whole national security issue out of it, rather confirming Trump's claim that China thought it controlled the ports in the canal, or even the whole canal itself. So it was unnecessary to politicize that. I'm not going to evaluate the deal. I don't have shares in the companies. I haven't looked closely at it. But it's a free market. They're free to buy and sell assets. I hope that if both parties to the transaction want to go ahead, they will.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.